Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be creating a very dimensional card. We're going to be using this really cool image from the new Birth-Yay stamp set. I love this image for birthdays or any type of occasion because it has all of these really fun characters kind of stacked on top of one another. And it's going to work really well for the idea I had for today's card. So what I want to do is I want to stamp out the main image, and then I'm going to stamp that image a bunch of times again, and I'm going to cut out just different parts of it, and we're going to do some really selective layering to kind of give our card a 3D look when it's finished. So the first thing I did is I stamped out my image onto white cardstock. This is Neenah 110 pound solar white cardstock. And I've stamped this out with extreme black ink, which is a Copic friendly ink, since I'm going to be using my Copic markers to color in the images. Now what I want to do with this main image is I want to color any of the areas where I already know I'm going to layer additional pieces just with a solid color. So I'm not going to do a lot of shading or blending. You can see for the rhino there, I only colored him with one shade of gray. And then I'm going to do the same thing for all of the rest of the elements. Now there is parts of this image that I'm not going to cover with any dimensional pieces. So for those ones I made sure to concentrate my coloring a little bit more and do some shading and blending, since those are going to be the actual images that you see on the finished card. So for example, the little turtle's head is going to be something that is visible on the finished card, so I did shade that a little bit. And the monkey is also another area where we're going to see most of his body on the finished card. The only part of him I'm going to layer is his tummy. So I'm going to make sure I do some really nice shading and blending on his body and his face, since we're going to completely see that area. A card design like this does take a little bit of time because we're going to be doing a lot of different coloring, since we're going to color a bunch of individual pieces, and then we're going to be doing a lot of fussy cutting. So we're going to be cutting out different elements with our scissors. So this is definitely a bit of a process, but I definitely think it's worth it in the end when you see all of the cool texture and dimension that we get by layering all of the elements. Another thing I love to do with this technique is to create something that I want to display in my room or my home. Because you have all of these great layers of dimension, this is a great way to do a wall print or just something that you want to display so that you can really see that dimension and really take advantage of showcasing it in your home. Okay, so now that we've done all of the coloring, we're going to go ahead and we're going to die cut this with the coordinating die. So I have my Sizzix Big Shot machine. This is my die cutting machine that I prefer to use. And I'm just lining up the die over top of the colored image, and I'm just going to use a little bit of removable tape just to secure that in place. I don't want to end up cutting it kind of askew and then having the whole colored image wrecked. So I like to use that tape just as a precaution to make sure nothing shifts when I'm doing the die cutting. Okay, so here's our finished image ready to go. So what we need to do now is get all of the pieces that we're going to use for the layering. So you can see here I already have all of the different layering elements colored and cut out. I did this off screen just to save a little bit of time, but pretty much all you need to do is stamp out the image for as many times as you want to create layering elements, and then you just want to go ahead and color those in. Now I made sure to do shading and blending on all of these pieces since they are going to be the top layers, so I want them to have nice shading and dimension. So I have all of the different pieces here that I'm going to be using. I ended up only using, I think, 2 of the balloons. I didn't end up using all 3 of them, but I'm going to just kind of go through the process really quickly here of what I did to create the layering elements. So for the little toucan image here, I originally thought I was going to layer his beak and his wings, so I colored both of those in, but I ended up only using the beak in the finished card. So I just took the same colors that I used on the image that I had colored previously, and I just added some color to those 2 areas. And now, like I mentioned, I'm using my scissors to very carefully fussy cut those pieces out. Once I have any of these little pieces cut out, I always like to take a black marker and go around the outside edge, and it just helps to conceal that white core that you get from cutting it out with your scissors, and it just makes everything look a lot more finished in the final project. So now that we have all of the pieces cut out, we have everything colored, now we need to create the background that we're going to put everything onto. So I have a piece of cardstock here that measures 4 inches by 5 1/4, which is just slightly smaller than the A2 size card base we're going to put the finished panel onto. I'm using Peacock Feathers Distress Ink, and I'm adding that to the panel. I'm not worried about getting it all the way to the other side since I know I'm going to layer some grass pieces on here. And then once I had the ink on there, I did add some water over top just to give it a little bit of a distressed look. So I'm just dabbing up that excess water with my paper towel, and now the background area is finished and we can pull everything else together that we need to create the scene. So for all of the scene elements on this card, I'm using the Spring Scene Builder Dynamics die set, and it has a bunch of different pieces in it that can work together to create a fully finished scene. So I have the grassy hills cut, I have the grassy edges cut, I've done the main part of the grass with Limelight and the grassy edges with some sour apple green, just to have a little bit of contrast in the two green colors. I've cut out the fence with craft cardstock. I cut out the little pieces here that are supposed to be for the sun, but I didn't end up using them in the final card. And then I have a bunch of clouds cut out as well. So now I have everything I need to create the scene. I have all of the die cut pieces, and I also have all of the stamped and colored pieces. I decided to add a little bit of inking to the grass pieces just to give them a little bit of shading, since they are pretty flat since it's just a solid piece of cardstock. So I'm using Twisted Citron, which is just a really nice lime green color that goes really nicely with that Limelight color. And I'm adding a little bit of this ink to the very top area of the grass. I'm also going to add a little bit of it to these little grassy pieces, but you don't notice it as much on this one since this is a darker green color. But I like the dimension that having this little bit of inking adds to the different pieces. Okay, so the star of the show of this kind of card design is foam adhesive. We need to have a bunch of it on hand so that we can layer all of the pieces on this card to kind of create a 3D look. So I'm using 3M foam tape. It comes on a big roll, and I'm just going to kind of layer it in any areas that I want to add even more dimension. The key to this type of card is you want to kind of keep track where you're adding the foam tape, because every time you add another layer where it's going to overlap, you're going to need to stack it up with that many pieces of foam tape, which probably makes zero sense, but you'll see what I mean here in just a minute as I start to add the elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the first piece of grass, and for this one here I used one piece of foam tape. So I know that I have one level of foam tape so far, and I'm just going to use my scissors here and I'm going to trim off the excess from that grass. Now for the second piece of grass, I know that I'm going to layer over top of that first piece we've added. So in the grass area, I only need one piece of foam tape since I have foam tape underneath of there. And then in the sky area, I need to have two. And this is just going to make sure that everything is completely level on the card as I add all of the pieces. So I'm just going to press this down and then once again use my scissors to trim off the extra. And now I'm going to add that little piece of grass to the bottom. I've just glued my two grass pieces together so that I have it a little bit wider, and I'm just going to adhere it onto another piece of foam tape. The next piece I'm going to add is the stamped piece that we created, and for this guy here I want to put regular adhesive, so just some liquid glue on his legs because we're going to adhere him directly to that grass piece. And I would need 2 layers of foam adhesive to make him go completely level with the grass area, since we have 2 layers of foam adhesive so far. But I actually wanted the little characters to stick out a little bit more at the top. So what I did is I put the regular adhesive on his feet, which is just the liquid glue, and then I layered 3 pieces of foam tape onto the top area here. So that's just going to give my stacked characters a little bit more pop, and it's going to make them kind of stick out a little bit more on the card than just the 2 layers that we initially started with. I'm also going to add those 3 layers of foam adhesive in behind the balloon to give that some support. And now you can see as I kind of tilt the card, the cool dimension that you get. We've barely even started yet, but we have this really cool dimension in the grass pieces as well as our main characters underneath. So the next thing I want to add is the fence. So for the fence, I'm going to add one of the pieces directly to the background. And so I'm just using some liquid glue to do that since it is kind of small. This was probably the most finicky piece of the card to add because I had to cut the foam tape really skinny. So what I did is I added 2 layers of the foam tape on each end of the fence, and then I added a little bit of liquid glue at the very bottom of the fence to adhere it to the grass. So this is the exact same layers as the grass area, so I know that everything is completely level. So the only thing that's a little bit different right now is the main characters on the stacked element. I did add that extra piece of foam adhesive just to give them a little bit more dimension. Okay, so now it's time to add all of the layers to our stamped and colored images. So for all of these layers, I'm going to be using 1 layer of foam adhesive, and for some of them I have multiple layers on one image. So for example, the rhino that we did here first, I did the first layer of him and then I added the little party hat on top of that. So he ended up being 3 layers in total. For the little monkey image, I did one of the cupcakes and layered that on with foam adhesive. I'm going to do the balloon now, and for this one here, I decided to do 2 layers of balloons. I originally wanted to do 3, but I thought having the 2 on there was enough dimension since it lifted it up quite a bit, since we already have 3 pieces of foam adhesive under the original balloon, and then we added 2 more by adding those second 2 balloons. And you can see here as I start to add some of the little elements, they are pretty teeny tiny, so I decided to use my tweezers to do some of them. It was just easier to kind of place everything and be able to see what I was doing, since you want to make sure that you line these up right over top of the original image. I finished up the monkey image and then I moved on to the turtle, and for him we're going to be adding a shell on top of his already colored shell there, and I'm also going to add a little party hat onto him as well. The party hats were definitely a challenge because they are pretty small, so I had to get that foam adhesive pretty tiny there, but I did make it work and I added his party hat onto him. And then the last part we're going to do is the little toucan bird. So my original plan on him was to add a body onto him and then add a little beak and a wing onto him, but I decided to just do the body part. I didn't want to add even more dimension, especially because he's right up near the top of the card. So I decided just to layer the body that we had cut out and leave it just like that. So that is going to complete our stacked animals, and we have a ton of dimension kind of in selective areas, which makes it look even cooler when you kind of turn it because you can't tell looking straight on what's actually dimensional. I wanted to keep the card really colorful, so I decided to stamp out the sentiment onto a piece of Razzleberry cardstock. So this sentiment is from the Birthday Bear and Friends stamp set, and I thought the Wish Big Today kind of went nicely with our design since we have so much dimension on the card. So I stamped it with Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, and then I added white embossing powder over top. I heat set that with my heat tool, and then I die cut the sentiment with the Hearts in a Row horizontal dies. They have these really great sentiment strips, and I love to use them for any of my sentiment stamps that will fit within that little area. I added 2 layers of foam adhesive to this little sentiment strip, and I added it right into the sky area, and I'll just trim off the extra with my scissors. Okay, so we are in the home stretch. We are almost on this card. Like I mentioned, I know it does take a bit of time because we're putting a lot of elements on here, but I just love the final result and so think it's worth it. So the last thing I want to do is just add on the clouds here. So for these, I'm also going to do a little bit of layering. I adhered the base layer of the cloud directly to the sky with my liquid glue, and then I'm going to use 1 layer of foam adhesive and add the exact same cloud directly over top. So I did that with this cloud here as well as the one to the far right, and then the one that's tucked in behind the sentiment strip, I just added directly to the card and didn't end up doing any layers on that one. And since we have a lot of green in the grass area and we've used the blue aqua color in the sky and the pink for the sentiment strip, I decided to go with the purple that we used on the cupcake for the card base, and I adhered the panel directly to that. I did decide that the grass area there under the fence was a little bit too plain, so I added the little water detail that comes with the spring scene builder, and then I added a little toucan bird there kind of sitting in the grass and did a layer on his beak as well. And that is going to finish our card, and we have all of these great layers that you really can't tell, like I mentioned before, on first glance, but once you tilt the card to the side, it's really cool to see all of the dimension. Now, I did want to mention one quick tip. If you don't want to see a lot of the foam adhesive when you're kind of looking from the side, you can just use smaller pieces of foam adhesive. Just kind of center them in the middle of the area that you're putting the adhesive, and it will help to conceal it a tiny bit more. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. All of the supplies I've used are linked in the video description below. Thank you so much for joining me for another video, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching.